And the biggest mitigating factor is our attachment system.
Okay.
And that's something that psychiatry basically doesn't pay any attention to. And what we know is that we are deeply attached individuals, and that the core of meaning psychologically, but also physiological systems, is the security that we feel with the people we love. And so if you feel loved and connect with the people around you, you invariably have a very different reaction than if you're all by yourself and isolated and nobody's there for you.
One of the things that struck me is that trauma really, it disconnects you. And so there's a sort of disconnection that happens between the mind and the body, between the past and the present, between you and the people around you, because it's very hard to have good relationships when you've been traumatized, because...
Don't be too categorical here.
Yes, tell me.
Because none of these things is 100% the case. Some traumatized people can have very deep friendships with people and be very devoted to their kids. And so there's many issues that happen, but they don't occur in everybody.
Yes. So this is what's fascinating. They don't occur to everybody. And what I find fascinating is that sense that it's not in the event, it's in your reaction to the event. And so what is it that determines how one person will react to a trauma in a completely different way to the other?
I wouldn't say that necessarily. People say, oh, this person wasn't affected by the trauma. How do you know? Just because they're able to keep a job and being pleasant dinner companion, how do you know that they don't do it? The only people who really know you are the people you're married to for some length of time. People may look great on the surface, but maybe it's hiding somewhere in their lives, and you don't get to see it. So I wouldn't automatically assume that people who are not obviously damaged are in fact not damaged.
And so do you think that a traumatic experience will damage everybody, but just in different ways?
It's never black and white. And so, and then people have the identical experience. We don't have the identical experience. Because like let's say somebody maybe get killed in front of her face. That person may remind me of my best friend. They may not remind you of anybody. If that person reminds me of my best friend, it will have a deep impact to me. I may be with somebody who I trust, who puts his arms around me, and who makes me feel I'm safe now, even though it's a horrible thing. And you may be standing there by yourself, see the same event, but it won't be the same experience. So it's only superficial people who say, oh, people react to the same event in different ways. No, I want to know the precise details of what happened before I would say that.
That's, and what, so...
Let me give you an example. I have an older brother who is very much into his body and was always a good athlete, and we had the same childhood experiences. I had asthma as a kid. If you have asthma, you have this very uncomfortable feeling in your body. And my brother always dealt with experiences very differently from the way I did, because I was an asthmatic kid. The external reality was pretty much the same, but the subjective experience was quite different.
And so what are the things that determine how you will react? One of the things you told me the other day, which I thought was fascinating, was that people on October the 7th who'd been taking psychedelics had less PTSD than people who were not on these psychedelics, for example. And we know that the state that you're in when the trauma occurs really determines how you will react to the trauma. Yeah. And there, you give a great example in your book of a child who had burns, or children who had burns, who needed a lot less morphine when their mother was with them and they had secure attachment. Yeah. Yeah. And so there are all these mitigating factors that really impact.
And the biggest mitigating factor is our attachment system.
Okay.
And that's something that psychiatry basically doesn't pay any attention to. And what we know is that we are deeply attached individuals, and that the core of meaning psychologically, but also physiological systems, is the security that we feel with the people we love. And so if you feel loved and connect with the people around you, you invariably have a very different reaction than if you're all by yourself and isolated and nobody's there for you. And so Oprah Winfrey and Bruce Perry wrote a lovely book called What Happened to You? Yes, what happened to you is important, but at least as important is who was there for you. And indeed we found, when we study burned children, is kids who feel secure with their parents react very differently to horrendous burns than kids whose parents are absent, traumatized, alcoholic, workaholic, busy doctors, who are not. You don't really feel, my parents are here for me. So this factor of being there for each other is a critical factor that keeps getting lost in our systems, both educational and medical systems. The attachment system is so important. John Bowlby already showed that already in his movies about children who are left by themselves. Just the act of being abandoned has a very profound function. And what actually was discovered here is that the attachment system trumps the trauma system. So as long as you feel safely attached with your environment, you can put up with a lot of stuff. Darwin already pointed out, almost 200 years ago, he said, if you get traumatized and you get stuck in fight or flight, it interferes with your capacity to take care of your offspring, and your offspring becomes less resilient.
Less.
Resilient. And so that what really marks civilization is our capacity to care for each other.
So then it's particularly challenging if the person who's committing the trauma essentially is your attachment figure.
But absolutely.
Do you think that is the most damaging type of trauma? I mean, if you're...
I know.
Yeah.
But it is a factor that almost invariably is left out in talking about trauma. Who was there for you? And indeed, I really separated from much of the rest of our field when I brought in the whole issue of attachment. And really, my research shows, and other people's research also, that the trauma that occurs in the attachment system is the most damaging trauma that people have, and the most prevalent stuff. So people keep talking about, oh, trauma happens to soldiers. But the first study I ever did, myself, was that soldiers got traumatized because their best friend got killed, or their best friend was no longer for them. So even my very first piece of research shows that the relationship you had to the people around you who your life depended on was critically important, whether you got traumatized or not. And then this whole issue came up with child abuse, and then I became very active in testifying on behalf of kids molested by Catholic priests. And this is always an issue. Who were the kids who were being abused? Oftentimes, these abusive priests had a nose for family violence and for abuse in the family, and they would hit on these kids and seduce them and say, you're safe with me, I'll take care of you, and then they would molest them. But they almost, from all the kids who I saw and the adults, they seemed to target kids whose home life was not secure. And so they could play the role of a substitute parent, and then they would hit.
And that's so devastating. I mean, because essentially this figure that's supposed to be secure in your attachment figure then turns against you.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's also research that shows that if there's social support during a traumatic time, like for instance a natural disaster or a war, then it really mitigates the effects of the trauma, right?
Not only social, it has several factors. Whatever social support is, people tend to be very superficial about it. How close are you to the person? How much does this person mean to you? It doesn't get asked. Do you have friends? Boom. Always very superficial. But not only that, the critical issue that also came up is whether you were able to do something. And so the issue of agency is terribly important. And by and large, as long as you can do something and move and activate those stress hormones that you secrete in order to cope, and if you can utilize them and become an ambulance driver or a medic or something to help people and to do something, that really mitigates against it also. And that physical immobilization and not being able to move and do something also is a major factor in it becoming traumatic. Yeah.
So if you're held down, or if you're a child and you can't run away, or if you don't have the agency, then it's much more traumatic, essentially.
Yeah, and
if you're immobilized.
Domestic violence, violence occurs between people, and sometimes people have violence in a relationship, and it's really nasty and unpleasant. But if you go like, hey, I'm out of here, you're probably going to be okay. But if you feel like you're physically or emotionally dependent, financially dependent on that person, or as happened in the United States and probably in the UK also, you couldn't have your own credit card without getting permission from your husband, then you're trapped. And our laws very much fed into being trapped. I just told you in the car that my mother came from quite a traumatic background, a lot of people do, and then she was very adaptive, became the vice president of an oil company at age 28, and she got married, and the Dutch law was if you have a job, you cannot, if you're married, you cannot have a job as a woman. So her coping mechanisms were just wiped out by social conditions.
Yeah, which is, so it's that being essentially immobilized. And you say after trauma, the world is experienced with a different nervous system. The survivor's energy now becomes focused on suppressing inner chaos at the expense of spontaneous involvement in their lives. How exactly, so first of all, we talk a lot about trauma, but there's this new sort of zeitgeist where people talk a lot about the nervous system and nervous system dysregulation. Would you equate trauma with nervous system dysregulation? What is the relationship between the two?
Yeah, the central nervous system is part of trauma. That is what gets affected. And so there is this misconception, fostered by our definition of PTSD, that trauma is about an event. And most people think something happened to you. But yes, that is part of it, but that event actually is over. But your system has changed. And now you continue to see the world through the lens that you saw it through at that particular time. So in the long range, it's not that event anymore. It is that your system has changed that makes you live in a completely different world. And much of that work was actually, our work was very, really showed it very clearly, is that your whole perception of the world becomes different. And your reaction, like studied by my close friend Sandy McFarlane in Australia, showed that if you play a little sound in somebody's ears, somebody who has been traumatized has a different reaction to that sound than somebody who wasn't. It's a non-traumatic sound. And so your brain and mind organizes reality differently. And so the big challenge is, how do we help people to be fully alive and alert now, and that continues and change people's nervous system so they can grow into the stage that they're in their lives. It's very complicated.
Very, yeah. And then the body reacts to physiological and psychological stress in the same way, essentially. So my understanding is that the body doesn't recognize the difference between a physical stressor like a toxin, or if your mother smokes when she's pregnant with you, or if you're exposed to mold, or if you're exposed to an infection. It causes a sort of stress response, which is similar to if you have a psychological stressor.
Yeah. See, I don't really differentiate between those two, huh? Because your emotional brain reacts to illness in a particular way of helplessness. And again, if you're helpless and you have people around you who make you feel cared for, you can let go and know that things will be better. But if there's nobody there for you, I give the example of my childhood asthma. It's a very lonely experience, so you interpret the world in a different way.
Yeah. But so your childhood asthma would have created a physical stress, but it was combined also with a psychological stress.
It's mainly a psychological stress.
Interesting.
It's terrifying, actually. Yeah,
and do you think the two, so I'm very interested in the link between the physical and the psychological.
You're so Western.
The what?
You're so Western.
Yeah.
That's the illness of the West, that they separate those things.
Yeah, it's true.
At this point, I don't really do that so much anymore. Like,
But okay, but in the DSM-5, which your favorite book.
No, let's not talk shit here. Like.
So if we're reframing sort of mental disorders in terms of trauma and nervous system dysregulation, how would you rewrite the DSM?
No, I wouldn't. Let's not go there.
Just throw it away.
No, the thing is, so how do you help people to deal with this dysregulation? And the thing is, you need to activate their self-system. And first of all, you need to make it safe for them to feel what they feel. So when you're traumatized, you get signals from your body, I'm in danger. You say, I'm not in danger, let me drink, let me just go on a long run and not feel anything. And you try not to feel. And so the first order of business is to make it feel safe to feel what you feel. So one of my early-ish studies was to look at yoga for the treatment of PTSD. And my colleagues go, he has gone off the deep end. Putting your butt in the air, twisting your body into a pretzel for PTSD, because they had a mind-body split like you seem to still have. And they said, that's crazy. And they did a study where you help people to feel their bodies and to touch their toes, and people started to feel safe to feel their bodies. And they felt safe to feel their bodies. Their PTSD score started to improve to the point that I could sort of say, more or less, that yoga proved to be more effective than most psychiatric medications for trauma that we had studied up to that point. So helping people to feel safe in their bodies and to meet their bodies and to feel their emotions, their feelings and sensations is very important. And then the very important issue became the issue of touch, because touch is the greatest comfort that people can have. In the monkey literature, we talk about ventral to ventral contact. Putting your naked belly against another naked belly is, for most people, a great source of comfort and pleasure. If you have been raped and assaulted, that may be a terrifying experience. And so you are deprived of one of the great sources of joy, pleasure, and comfort in life. In psychiatry, we don't touch. And so learning to feel in your body that that it's safe to be touched is very important. that's not anywhere near the mainstream of what we do, and it takes a lot of very good training and very good body work to actually help people to feel their bodies and feel safe with human touch. And I know very few people who know how to do that well, but I know quite a few people who do.
Yeah.
I can really help people with that. Yeah.
And so if we're talking about ways of addressing trauma, and we throw out the DSM, and we basically
Good, let's do that. Yeah.
We basically...
Let's just talk about DSM. I was one of the people who contributed to the diagnosis visually, and we were very proud of ourselves that we had made this list of symptoms. But then when people reified this list of symptoms, you know, John McCain or John Kerry, these two US senators whose names you may have heard, probably had the same PTSD score as the homeless person down the street who lies there in a sleeping bag in the street. That is only a very small part of the whole larger picture. And you know, these psychiatric diagnoses really don't tell us much about who this person is. It tells us a little bit about particular ways in which they're screwed up, but they don't tell us anything about that person. And you can be a damn genius and a fantastic doctor or whatever, and have terrible PTSD score, or you can be a homeless person. So there's all kind of other variables.
You talk about how trauma really, you know, overwhelms your capacity to filter, and it overwhelms your capacity to focus and concentrate, and it really sounded like a description of ADHD.
Yeah, but see, so people buy these labels, but what does the label mean? The label means this person is unable to pay attention and sit still. Why could you just say this person is unable to sit still rather than using fancy language that obscures the reality? Because there's all kinds of underlying issues. It doesn't tell us anything. Every traumatized kid I've ever met probably meets diagnostic criteria for ADHD. That doesn't mean that every person who has ADHD has been traumatized. So the surface phenomena are the same, but for God's sake, you're trained. We pay you a lot of money. You need to do better than giving a superficial label to people. You know?
Completely.
Yeah.
And so in terms of healing trauma, so you've tried so many different modalities. I mean, you talk about EMDR, you talk about neurofeedback.
I studied each one of these things.
And you studied...
That's very important. I'm just not a fan.
Yeah.
When I see something, I say, it seems to work. For whom does it work? For whom it doesn't work? And we really, that's what I've done in my life. I'm not a philosopher. I'm an empiricist. And I go, for whom does it work? For whom it doesn't work? And so, yes, I did the first study on EMDR, and it worked for some people and not for other people. I did the first study in scientific studies yoga. It worked for some people and not for other people. And they can need to figure out for whom does it work and for whom it doesn't work. That's really what meaning a scientist means. You need to really know the stuff. Yeah.
And so how is it the skill of the therapist or the skill of the psychiatrist that then manages to correlate what they think will work best in terms of healing modality and then match that patient to the healing modality? Right. Is that, and then how do you determine, okay, for this person, neurofeedback will work better. For this person, EMDR will work better. For this person, psychedelics might work better.
Well, that's because you really, at some point, you really know the modalities available. There's really a problem in the field of therapy is that many therapists, I wouldn't say everybody, many therapists become religious people.
Yeah.
They happen to have read some Freud, and they say, I'm a Freudian. And somebody else happens to have read some Jungian and say, I'm a Jungian. And then somebody learns EMDR and says, I'm an EMDR therapist. That is just a technique. They were two flawed guys who had interesting notions, but what is it that you need is not what my religious belief is in these dead guys. It is, do you think Freudian psychoanalysis would help you? Probably not. Will Jungian stuff help you? Let's find out. But you need to really go, like, everybody who does this work should know a whole host of different modalities, first of all. And so, yes, EMDR turns out to be a very helpful treatment for many people. So that's one of the tools I have in my toolbox. But if you are chronically unable to focus and to concentrate and pay attention, I wouldn't do EMDR on you. I would say this person's mind is unable to focus and concentrate. And I would think, let's see if neurofeedback can help you and do some computer-brain interface work on you where I help you to regulate your brain waves so you can actually focus your attention better. Yeah. And if you continue to live in a whole atmosphere of danger and fear that is sort of global, these days I would say, be very helpful if you can try psychedelic agents for you in a very safe environment where we can allow you to go very deep into altered realities and help you to rearrange what is real for you. But it needs to be done extremely carefully.
Yeah, completely. And so, you know, other therapies that you talk about is theater therapy, for instance. Yeah. So reimagining a different outcome of what happened to you.
And that's not quite it. I got into theater because people's identity gets formed in a certain way, and they say, I need to be the toughest person on the block, otherwise I'll get hurt. Or I will always be ineffective, so I always need to suck up to other people. And that becomes their identity, their character in a way. And then we were inspired by a program in my neighborhood called Shakespeare in the Court. When you are a juvenile delinquent in my particular county, you have a 50% chance if you commit a minor crime as an adolescent, that the judge says to you, you have a choice. You can either go to jail or you can become a Shakespearean actor. I come from a civilized part of the world, actually. And so half of the kids choose jail because it's safer, half of them go to Shakespearean actors. And when you play these roles, and you play the role of Lady Macbeth, when you're a very scared little girl, and you play the role of a mighty queen who tells her husband, I want you to kill your king, otherwise I'll never have sex with you anymore. And the guy goes, I don't really want to kill my king. And then you, as the mighty queen, says, if he had not so resembled my father, I would have done the deed myself. And when you play that role, you go like, oh my God, that's what it feels like to be a mighty queen. I will try that out a little bit more. And so people get the experience of being somebody other than the identity they have acquired. That's why we do theater.
Which is key. Yeah. Now, I think we are almost at our 45-minute mark. It's gone very, very quickly. Yeah.
You barely scratched the surface.
Yeah, we barely scratched the surface, I agree. It's very frustrating. Current treatment guidelines, at least in the UK, so NICE guidelines, they're the guidelines for prescribing. So basically, if you're a psychiatrist, then you'll go to the NICE guidelines and they'll say, okay, if you've got depression, you prescribe an SSRI or you prescribe CBT. Those are the two sort of treatments that are currently most prevalent in the NICE guidelines, so SSRIs and CBT. What is your view on those two sort of standard of care modalities of treatment?
Yeah, I don't live in that world anymore. And I didn't start off in that world because I lived in a world of ignorance. Of ignorance. Ignorance. And that's a very good world to live in because then little lights start shining from time to time. Once you know the truth, you don't learn anything anymore. And so what I've seen happen in our profession, and you may not know this, but I'm really quite an old guy, is that these days people try to manage other people. And I supervise a lot of young people and say, how do I manage this? And I go, I have no idea. I can barely manage myself. How can I manage somebody else? But maybe I can help you to figure out what it is that you feel you need and what works for you. And so, like, there's this CBT stuff. cognitive behavioral treatment where you tell people to not have their irrational thoughts. I do that with my wife all the time. I tell her that her thinking is off, and she does it. And it's a miracle for our relationship. She's always so grateful when I point out to her how her thinking is not normal. How did psychologists think so low as to do a stupid marital argument with people like me? Telling people that their thinking is abnormal doesn't really help people to become mindful people, you know? Like what the hell happened? Medication sometimes can be helpful, but if that's the only thing you know, that's the only thing you do.
Yeah, agreed. No, I mean, I think everybody in the...
And a very important part of my training back then was still, you have to do your own work. And you have to really examine who you are. And at that time it's all psychoanalysis, but you need to actually, what has happened in our field is that people say, you're screwed up and I'm not. You're mentally ill and I'm perfectly normal. And I'm doing a thing later on this week about what is normalcy. I've never met a normal person in my life. Everybody has their quirks and their abnormalities. And so to say, you're messed up, you need a drug, and I'm not, that's not the world I live in. Say, you have problems getting close to people, or you have problems focusing and concentrating, or what is it going on with you that gets in the way of optimal functioning? And so what we really should be doing is to study what would be your best level of functioning and what gets in the way of your fulfilling what could be your destiny. Yeah. And what can we do to help you to lead a more satisfying life?
So in terms of what we were just starting on, which was sort of the healing, which is really, what can you do? I mean, there's so many different modalities, and we were talking a little bit about how you choose those modalities for each person. And one of the things that I was looking at was, it's not so much the modality, but it's what it actually does. And so I sort of picked out a few things from your book that need to happen for you to heal. One of them is what you mentioned, reestablishing a sense of safety. And so my question is, what is the best way of doing that? How do you, because you say, and I'm going to quote, these early explorations shape the limbic structures devoted to emotions and memory, but these structures can also be significantly modified by later experiences. For the better, by a close friendship or a beautiful first love, for example, or for the worse, by violent assault, relentless bullying, or neglect. And so what you're saying is essentially the neuroplasticity, that there is hope that once you've had this trauma, which has been ingrained in your nervous system, essentially, and at one point you talk about how when stress hormones accompany the event, it grooves the experience deeper into your brain, right? Yeah. And so really, in order to heal, you need to reestablish that sense of safety. You need to have these positive experiences, which then can reshape the neuroplasticity to be in a better place. So what are the best ways of doing that?
Well, you bring up a really important issue that's not part of the trauma spectrum, and it's the neglect issue. And so if you grow up in a very chaotic environment and you're yet another child who is a burden, you're just a pain in the ass person who bothers people in some ways. And so nobody is particularly glad to see you. There's no sense of joy in seeing you. And that, of course, is very different from most people I know who plan their kids, and when they have their kids, they really treasure those kids. Maybe they get over-involved with their kids, but we're not like old-time families that some people in this audience I'm sure came from, where you have 7 kids and they raise each other in a way. And so a very important part to become who you are is to be known and to be seen.
To be known and to be seen.
And that is much even bigger than the whole trauma issue, is do people know me? Do people see me? And that, of course, is a big issue in medicine and psychiatry today also, because you are a list of symptoms, and nobody gets it. That's interesting. I live in Boston. Boston is hospitals around within a mile from my house all say we're the greatest hospital in the world, and I bet they are great if you get really sick. But when I go to any of these hospitals, I'm just a chemical profile. Nobody knows me. Where do I get my health care? In a small village in northern Vermont, where Bernie Sanders also goes. And they know me. And I walk in there, they know me, and they remember me from last year. And I feel really secure because I'm a known entity. And they say, how are you doing? If you're just part of a large machine, it's, oh, let me look at your values, oh, they're off, okay, you should increase your data, you should come back in 3 months. That doesn't give you a sense of security, that people are looking after you. So it is critical for us, for each one of us, to be known and to be seen. And that is really where safety starts. If somebody knows you and knows something about you that's special, you feel like, oh, I count, I matter. So that's sort of the beginning of becoming healed, is somebody who actually knows you and sees you. And that's also a very important part of where therapy starts, is that you need to be seen and you need to be known, but you also need to know yourself. And a lot of traumatized people don't know themselves. And so maybe the beginning of healing from trauma is to find language for yourself and to be able to talk about what happens inside of you. And so I think language is still a very important part of who we are, and being able to articulate what we feel, what we see, what we like and don't like. And you're not a list of symptoms. You are a person who likes certain things and doesn't like other things. And that's where you start. You need to be known. And the core of therapy is to feel known, not only by other people, but by yourself. And if you have been neglected and abused, you may not know yourself. So finding language for yourself, writing about yourself, very important to be able to write, this is what I feel, this is what I see, this is what happens to me. And that's what we have language for. So language is terribly important.
It's very interesting because you mention, in your book that people who have been traumatized have a really hard time figuring out what they want.
Yep.
They have a hard time making decisions. Often they have a hard time feeling a purpose or a sense of meaning in their life.
Yes, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But there's a lot of internal confusion.
Yes.
And language is an important way of beginning to know what's going on here, and to also discover sometimes I feel this way, and other times I feel a different way. So language helps you to focus and to become aware and to become somebody. I encourage everybody to have kids, because kids will show you in the first 3.5 years, there is no language. They're very aware, they're very around. You see the temperaments, so they're very important for people. And then they slowly develop language and say, I'm sad, I'm angry. And when you have attentive parents, you learn to identify your feelings, and you learn to know who you are. If nobody talks to you, you do not learn who you are, courtesy of John Bowlby, who taught us what cannot be told to the mother, the other, can not be told to the self. So being able to tell each other how we feel and what we like is a very important part. I'm not going to fix you and tell you should do something, because you have to fix yourself. But you cannot fix yourself unless you know yourself. And unless they say, boy, how is it going? And I'm interested. And when you have done something, I go, wow, that's amazing that you did this. Were you able to do it all the time? No, under some conditions it's not working. You say, what happens? Okay, and you can really investigate yourself. I'm always astounded by how many people go to doctors and expect the doctors to know what's going on with them and to passively receive what people do to them. But at the end, it is your life. For example, the issue of suicidality. Very central. The big thing in the US mental health, is this person suicidal or not? If a kid is suicidal, I wonder, why does this kid not want to live anymore? And, you know, when you're my age, you better think about suicide, because do I really want to end the last 20 years of my life in a nursing home being fed, or do I want to be in charge of my own death? It's a very immature thing to have to consider. But very normal to think about these things. And you have to make that decision one way or another. If a kid starts thinking about it, why is this kid thinking about killing himself? Because something makes it terrifying for him to live. And my attitude is always, that's good. You know a way out. That gives you power. And so maybe can I help you to see if there's something else that's worth living for? Not like, let's make sure you don't want to kill yourself. It is, let me make sure that I can help you, that you have something to live for. That's the task of the therapist, not to get the lawyers off your back to hold you responsible for somebody's death. I'm responsible to help you to try to have a life. So how can I help you to find things that are worth your while? Yeah. And you can always kill yourself if it doesn't work. But let's see if it's worthwhile for you to do something else.
And so you talk about language.
By the way, I've never had a suicide until today, but I never know. It may happen. But it's not my responsibility whether you kill yourself or not. Yeah. I'll feel sad if you do it, but it's your life, it's your life, and this is my life. I cannot run your life for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, so feeling safe, being able to have a sense of yourself and being able to verbalize that sense of self.
And to be seen.
And to be seen.
I think that communal thing is so important. That most adolescents go through terrible times, but my parents will be disappointed if I kill myself. Yeah. Let me get some good grades so my parents are at least proud of me. Something, because we are interpersonal creatures. And we always are thinking about what other people are thinking of us, and we make a good impression, because that is our nature, is to be interconnected. So the question is, who are you playing to? Yeah. Who are the people whose judgment is important to you? Yeah. And if a kid says, nobody gives a fuck about whether I live or die, you go, that's a problem.
You have to matter.
You have to matter. Mm-hmm. Huh? And I think all the programs that we are involved with and my organization are programs that help kids to know that they matter. That's why I love theater, for example. If you do a piece of theater, which we have done a lot of in the Boston and Sydney schools, if you don't show up, the play cannot go on. So I need to go to my play, it matters. I'm on my team. And if the sports team, if they don't show up, my team is going to lose. We need to have that feeling that I'm an essential ingredient for other people's lives and not only my own. That's our nature. And argue with me if you don't agree with me, because I love to argue with people, but that is my idea about who we are.
And so another state, another sort of prerequisite for healing is to get into the right state. And you say, and I'm going to quote again, mainstream medicine is firmly committed to a better life through chemistry, and the fact that we can actually change our own physiology and inner equilibrium by means other than drugs is rarely considered. And so one of the essential prerequisites for healing is being able to manage your own state. And so what are the best ways that you would work with people to help them to manage their own state, to self-regulate, to self-organize?
You help people to discover what makes them feel focused or calm, etc., etc. And it's always an experimental question. Let's see what happens if we take a deep breath and breathe out slowly. And let's do that a few times. Do you notice that something is different? What happens if you touch your leg? What happens if you sit up straight? Let's discover what makes you feel well, and to really see what makes a difference in your life. What sort of music do you like? What sort of sound do you like? So to really discover what your body responds to and how your body changes as you engage in music or engage in sports or engage in activities. One thing that actually we talked about today in the meeting that you weren't there for is that I advocate that all of our schools around the world teach the 4 basic R's: reading, writing, arithmetic, and self-regulation. And that's from kindergarten through the end of high school. Every week you have classes and laboratories about who are we, how does our brain function, what's it like to be talking to each other, what's it like to sing together, what's it like to make music together, what is it like to throw a basketball, what's it like to engage with people, and to really discover who we are, not only what's out there, but this is inside of us. And for people to become curious about their internal workings and to really practice what it does for you when somebody touches your arm. What's it like for you if you toss that basketball? To really become aware of how that internal creature, you, respond to the world and what happens inside of you, and to become curious about this immense universe that you inhabit.
And so, because, you talk about how learning to manage arousal is a key life skill, which is taught to you by your parents, essentially. What if you miss that developmental milestone and you were not taught by your parents? Later on, can you still get back to that learning to regulate?
Of course you can. We are malleable creatures. We have ongoing neuroplasticity. And you already have discovered that if you listen to Bruce Springfield, you feel a bit calmer. And if you smoke a little dope, that when somebody yells at you, it doesn't bother you so much. And so let's discover what helps you feel calmer and to be more mindful. And as you and I just discussed, mindfulness is very important, learning to notice yourself and to feel yourself. But for many people, being mindful is very scary because the body keeps a score, and once you become quiet, all of this stuff starts coming up, and it may be a very scary experience. But then what we discover is that if you do Tai Chi or yoga, you can fully engage with your body, but you also have to pay attention to how your body moves, and you still get that internal capacity for self-regulation. And around the world, everywhere except for the UK and the Netherlands, where I grew up, and New England, where I live now, people have traditions of moving together and singing together and dancing together as a way of regulating yourself. And what do you do with your kids when they are upset? You sing together, you move together, you do things together to calm yourself down. But moving and that sort of stuff is prescribed in our white Northern European cultures, but the rest of the world does that beautifully.
And is this what you mean by top-down and bottom-up? So the bottom-up is more the movement, and the top-down is more the talking?
No, the bottom-up is to really engage the body, to be rhythmically engaged with other people. There's two places where I really learned that. One is the first time I was in China, not long after the Cultural Revolution, and China was in very bad shape, and nobody could talk about anything, but every park in China and every open space had people doing Qigong and Tai Chi. And I get, what the hell are these people doing? I'm miserable myself, because it's such a miserable place, And I start doing Qigong in the park with those Chinese. And I go, oh, that makes you feel so much calmer and so much better. So that's how people survive in China. And then I was part of the Truth Commission in South Africa, and I hang out with Bishop Tutu in a country that's completely explosive and ready to kill like crazy and take revenge on all these people of my background who had been killing them. And Tutu would come in there and he would sing with people. And he would pray with people. He would dance with people. And everybody would feel good about each other and feel a sense of pleasure and joy. And then Tutu would say, over there, would you like to tell us what happened to you? And that person would tell a horror story and was beginning to find language for what happened to him. And Tutu would take it in and say, oh my God, that's so horrible. It is too much to bear for you and for us. Let's move together and dance together. And they would move, and then they would feel calmer. And he would say, please, are you willing to tell us a little bit more? And what he did is this central issue of good trauma therapy is pendulation. He helped people feel safe and comfortable. And from that place, you go into the darkness. And when the darkness becomes too much, you help to pull people out of the darkness and then feel safe again, and you go a little bit deeper. And Tutu was the best trauma therapist I've ever met. But if I did with my patients what Tutu did, people would say he has gone off the deep end.
That is the thing. I mean, there's so many other questions, and I'm just keeping an eye on the time. But you know, you talk a lot, for instance, about EMDR, neurofeedback, and brainwaves, and sort of this sort of synchronicity and the connecting of the different parts of the brain, so the left and the right hemisphere, the cortical and the subcortical, and how integration is so important, and how these sort of brainwave interventions, whether it's EMDR or REM sleep or neurofeedback, really helps to integrate and regulate. Is that how it works?
No, that's still very much a frontier, and as the more you delve into the biology and the neuroscience, the more you see how some very fundamental processes are really messed up, and that is where we should be going. For example, you can do brain-computer interfaces where you put electrodes on people's heads, project their brainwaves on a computer screen, and then play computer games with your own brainwaves, where you get rewarded for getting the sort of neural activity that helps you to focus, be calm, and pay attention. I've done extensive research on that. My supporter was actually a British individual right here in London, but I never got a major grant in it, even though it is an extremely effective treatment, because psychiatry is involved with drugs. And this whole issue of reducing anything to chemical things is a problem. We're going to talk about psychedelics in a bit, I think. And so recently, we did this really astounding piece of research showing how the ecstasy, Molly, is an extraordinarily effective treatment for trauma. We did a major piece of research that cost $163 million. We collected as precise data as you ever get. And our FDA said the side effects outweigh the therapeutic effects. There were no side effects in our study. We focused on every conceivable side effect. It didn't happen. And we barely looked at therapeutic effects, but they were major. And so my whole world was completely flabbergasted and horrified by this decision that keeps these drugs illegal and not accessible for general care. And so our team gets together, and I invite them to come to my house to do it. And one of my teammates, one of my therapists, calls me up at the last moment and says, you know, Bessel, we have this new baby, as you know, and my wife is not feeling back. I think I have to stay home to take care of my baby. And I said to him, Michael, don't be crazy. all your baby needs is the right chemicals. And so when you give the right chemicals, and you can come to the retreat. Ha, ha, ha. Because that's the attitude of psychiatry, that all people need is the right chemicals and they'll be okay, and that human connection doesn't matter.
This is true, although human connection releases chemicals that are very healing, right? Oxytocin, serotonin.
Yeah.
So maybe the two are a little linked. In terms of psychedelics, because I know this is your big thing, it's one of the treatment modalities that you're exploring, that you're researching quite a lot, and you've had some phenomenal results.
Yeah, phenomenal results.
Now, we know that the June decision was disappointing by the FDA, but...
Disappointing is an understatement.
An understatement,
In fact, it's outrageous.
Yeah.
If people say, we need to collect the data, we collected the data. One of our papers got the prize for the journal Science of one of the most important scientific breakthroughs in the whole world, in any branch of science, in this particular year. We did exquisitely careful research, and it got rejected. God knows why.
So tell us a little bit about the potential and your hope and your vision for sort of the future of trauma treatment, specifically about psychedelics, but also in terms of everything else.
So in some ways you can construe post-traumatic stress as getting stuck in a habit. From now on, every little sound reminds you or makes you feel terrified, or a person who looks a particular way makes you react in a circumscribed moment. The very first book about trauma was written by a guy in France in 1889 called Pierre Janet, and his book is called L'automatisme psychologique, meaning psychological automatisms, and when you get traumatized, you automatically keep engaging in the same behavior. Absolutely true. So how do we change people's habits of their brain and their bodies to react? And one way is to build up your frontal lobe and become more aware of this creature is and take care of this creature. Another way is changing core regulatory systems with neurofeedback and yoga, for example, to calm the back of the brain down. And another thing is to expose people to really very different experiences. And that's what psychedelics do. They, I'm a child of the 60s, so of course I took LSD in college. Not too much, only 5 experiences, but they're very powerful. And I have quite a few colleagues who are very prominent scientists. And I asked them, so did you take acid in college also? And they all say, sure I did, of course. And I said, what effect do you think it had on your scientific work? And they say, everything. Because on acid, I realized that the reality that I'm living in is just a tiny segment of the overall reality that there is. And my little mind can only grasp that much at a time. And on these psychedelic agents, you can see or imagine a much larger universe. And that's what we see in the psychedelic treatments, that people really have experiences that are out of the ordinary, oftentimes of great connection with your larger universe, and oftentimes they're very scary experiences. And so you also get to feel terror and fear, and so the environment in which this happens needs to be an extraordinarily careful, thoughtful society. So basically you feel that even if bad things come up, there's people there are there for you. And then, not my work, but the work of a woman by the name of Gül Dölen shows that psychedelic agents open up neuroplasticity. And that is maybe the most important scientific finding in our field, as long as I know actually, because it shows that the brain generally takes things and organizes itself on the basis of experience. And that becomes very rigid, and if you don't get the right experience at the right time, your brain may not be able to develop that capacity. We know this from animal research, monkey research. Human beings are a little bit more complicated, that if you don't feel, get the feeling of love and being held early on in your life, as monkeys, for example, if monkeys are separated from their moms and not being touched for a while, they do not learn how to play with other monkeys. They do not learn how to have fun with other monkeys, and they die. And that reminds me very much of what happens to human beings who are neglected, who really don't know what it's like to have fun with other people and to be open to other people. And what this research shows is that on these psychedelic agents, for a moment, your brain opens itself up to new experiences. And so what you may not have gotten early on may come in. And so the context in which you have psychedelic experiences becomes terribly important, because whatever happens at that time may become permanently engrafted on the brain. So if you go through magical experiences and the environment supports that magic, you now know, oh my God, the world is so much richer than I knew before. And if you go through a terrifying experience, you get to know, like, oh, terrifying experiences happen, but there are people around you who can help you to make you feel safe and to protect you. And that also becomes part of yourself. So to my mind, this is really the big frontier in our lives. And the decision of the FDA is an unbelievable decision. And part of what I'm doing right now in the UK is, you guys have always faithfully followed America into every war we fight. Don't follow America in this, and follow David Nutt and your own researchers to really help you to open up these amazing possibilities very, very carefully. Yeah.
Completely. Yeah. And I mean, there's so much more to say. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, so I'm going to start with these questions. I did have a question that I was desperate to ask you about the traumatizing of our modern societies, and I don't know anyway, but I can't because I have to, because there is a lot of trauma in our modern societies. Okay, so let's start with these questions. What inspires you as a therapist?
What inspires me as a therapist is to see how much terrible things people go through, and what, if you do the therapy in a conscientious way, what you meet is the life force. That when you talk about a lot of people who is lay people say, oh, why does one person respond so badly, the other person doesn't? My response to every trauma story I hear, if you go to the details, I go like, oh my God, and you're still here. And how do you survive? And people say, I don't know. What you meet is this tenacious impulse for people to be alive. And what you see in the people you work with, which you miss if you try to manage them, is how people have this amazing force that tries to propel them to go on with their lives. And that is what you meet. And you meet the innate courage and energy that people have to be alive. And that's what you work with when you're a trauma therapist.
Amazing.
And you, at the end, you basically admire everybody you work with. Oh, this happened to you, and you only have tried to kill yourself 30 times. Boy, if I'd gone through what you'd gone through, I would have probably done this 100 times. Like, and you really, when you really hear people's stories in detail, you go like, oh my God. And what kept you going? And what gives you hope? And the word hope is a very important word in our field. Let me give you an example. I was very, very chronically depressed until quite recently, because the next election in America was between a horrible psychopath and a demented man. And I thought, that's the future of the world. And I thought, why does this demented man not resign, for God's sake? Or why does his wife yak him off the stage? Because the world needs hope. And finally, people say, he did the heroic thing. No, he did the right thing, what an old guy should do. Step aside for a younger person. And you have this younger person. I'm filled with hope for the future. And I think my whole central nervous system changed with this little thing. And I bet some of your central nervous system changed also, because this election will have as large an impact on Europe as it has on America. So this is a sort of example of the things that are relevant, you know.
Here, here. Yeah. If you could update any area of your book, what would it be and why?
Definitely psychedelics. I think I covered everything else. You know, I've done a lot more research in neurofeedback. Other people have done great things in body work. But that's sort of, I covered the principles of that in the book. But what is really new, I have one little paragraph in the book about it, is psychedelics. And the ability to mind-altering drugs to change our mind. And it's very tricky, because already people are sort of trying to make a lot of money on it and primarily look at the profit motive, which I really am horrified by, because we need to very carefully see how we can help people best, what the circumstances are, what the conditions are, but it needs to be opened up for very, very careful clinical practice and research. Research should always be part of it. For whom does it work? What does it do? What can it do and what can it not do?
And you yourself have a fantastic research foundation called the Trauma Research Foundation, which has a fund to do this type of research, and that's so important to do that research.
So my foundation is very much about seeing how psychiatrists who are stuck in the same old stuff, drugs, drugs, talk, let me fix your thoughts, and to but it's really also really exciting for me in this work is to travel around and to go to South Africa and Rwanda and in the schools down from the street from me, where you meet amazing people doing amazing work. And like some of the theater people I know are spectacular. Some of the yoga people I know who work with inner city kids are spectacular. But at this point, they're not evidence-based treatment. And academia is very much an evidence-based treatment, mainly out of power. My method is the best treatment, so I get more money and prestige for doing what I'm doing. It's not really a true exploration. Most people who promote evidence-based treatment promote the same goddamn thing over and over again, year after year, even though half of their patients don't get better. And so what we are interested in seeing is who is doing interesting work, and let's really study that and help those people do more of that work, and then really see for whom does it help and for whom it doesn't help, and let's explore music for kids, and let's explore dancing for kids, and let's explore neurofeedback for kids. And so let's really see what is out there, and there's an issue here that mental health professionals think that they're the only people who make a difference. And the person who may make most difference for you may be your yoga teacher, or your choir instructor, or your karate teacher. People change through a whole bunch of different things, and we are very dedicated in really exploring all the different things that can move these systems in people and to open up people to multiple realities, basically.
Amazing. Yeah. That's fantastic. If not CBT, then what?
Well, I don't know about you, but people telling me that I need to change my thinking and change my behavior, I don't really feel very encouraged by that, you know. Of course, couples do that to each all the time. We always do DBT in each other. But I don't find it all that effective. But if I'm more in touch with my own feelings and my own capacities, I become a much more enjoyable partner. And she doesn't need to do DBT anymore. It point out how I messed up, because I'm a more open person. So if not DBT, self-awareness, self-exploration, getting to know yourself, getting to know what makes you feel alive? What helps you to feel open-hearted? It's an exploration of yourself in terms of what can open you up. And you need to have somebody who encourages you to explore and to discover. And that's really how I see our role as people who really help people to discover themselves. That's not all that different from parenting kids. Parenting kids is also, let's try this, let's see what goes. And as a parent, you also set limits. And as a therapist, there also needs be some limits. No, you really cannot take heroin because that's not going to get you where you need to be. And so there need to be some limits, but most of all, exploration. Yeah.
Can therapy ever help get to the root of trauma and heal the person completely? And if not, then what is the point of therapy?
Love that question. So we are creatures, and we all have challenges. We all have issues. We all have... life is hard. I'm aware that I'm going to die, and it won't take me longer than it takes you. And so there's death, and there's loss, and there's heartbreak, which is part of all of us. And so, will your life be easy? No. As my old friend David Servan Schreiber said, every life is difficult. Your life is difficult, my life is difficult, despite all the good things that have happened to me. And so, will you ever be completely happy and well? No, because humans have major challenges, and you'll have sorrow in your life, you have disappointment in yourself and the people around you. So are you ever well? What is well? Will you feel like you're doing what you can? Do you feel satisfaction in what you do? Do you feel a sense of peace with yourself? Yes. Do people resolve that trauma? Absolutely. Even people with, that's the astounding thing that we saw, for example, in our psychedelic research, is that people, I try to sort of be very careful in who got admitted to the study. The entrance criteria for the study were much wider than I wanted to, and almost every person who came into our study, I said, fasten your seatbelt. It's unlikely that this will go well. For almost everybody, it made profound changes. And to feel profound changes in yourself, as I hope everybody in this room has experienced at some point by doing something that opened up new windows for yourself, you go like, wow, there's much more to life than I thought there was. And that's what life is about. Are you ever completely happy and well? No, no way. Forget about it. But will you feel alive, and do you feel energetic? Absolutely, yeah.
Is joy an antidote to trauma?
Yeah. So one of the things, I think that's probably the main reason why the FDA turned down all this data that we had, is the terror that people might possibly feel pleasure. Oh my God. Our profession is about misery. It's about making you not depressed, making you functional, making you not be a pain in the ass. But pleasure? Oh my God. Life is about pleasure. And the greatest reward in life is pleasure. So what can we do to help people feel pleasure is very important.
How can you help a child with an absent parental figure?
What?
How can you help a child with an absent
very
parental
important. And that's something we confront all the time. There's a lot of kids who grow up in misery and being raised by TVs and seeing domestic violence, and who are sort of unwanted. How do you help these kids? The critical issue is make that child feel seen and known. And if this kid gets, that person saw me. That person knows who I am. I keep telling it to my students. You think you know nothing at this point. You think you make no difference. But you may leave a lasting imprint on everybody who you meet. Anybody who feels like this person really gets me. This person understands me. That is a gigantic piece of coming online. As long as nobody sees you, you're not online. And so, yes, a lot of kids grow up under extreme adverse circumstances, but if they come into a sports program where they play an important role, a music program or a theater program or anything where they move and do things with other people, gives them a sense of connection and pleasure and gives them an alternative view of the world other than what's happening at home. And so whatever happens to these kids outside the home may be profoundly important in terms of who they become. You know, one of my closest colleagues is a man who grew up like many deprived people in America of color, and he's a brilliant man. And he says, what made the difference for me is somebody always saw me. One person always saw me, and always saw my potential and affirmed my potential. Yes, a lot of kids grow up under terrible circumstances, but the experience of being seen and being known, which we see so clearly also in the theater programs that we're involved in, is a life-giving energy force that comes inside of you, that stays inside of you.
That's very beautiful. Is a distinct lack of memories of childhood an indication of trauma at a young age?
It's a good question. It really makes you wonder, but I would not automatically assume that that's a lack of trauma. I think you know more from people's reactions in the here and now. As I've said before, as well as I could, that trauma is really not about the past, it's about the present. And so you get to know people by their reactions. And if whenever you're nice to me, I become aggressive towards you, you go like, that's interesting. Have you noticed that whenever I say something nice to you, you make a hostile comment? What's that about?
Right.
And so don't infer too much. And some of my colleagues are like, go trauma. Not me, no.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting, though, because it just comes out, you know, implicit memory versus explicit memory.
Absolutely. And so, you know, one of the things that I knew how the psychedelic study we're doing was not designed by people who really knew the field, is we had to work with an index trauma. We had to say, that happened to this person, and that index was resolved. Well, the reality was, as we know as clinicians, that the index trauma that people talk about is always a cover story. It is what people can talk about. But usually what's underneath there is stuff that they can't talk about that's even more horrendous. And in our psychedelic treatment, there was layer after layer that came up, oftentimes stuff that people had been completely unaware of, that their mind manifested themselves, and there was another layer of reality. So we are very complex people, and our awareness of ourselves is only very limited.
How does one help someone deal with triggers from past trauma?
Well, you notice it, and of course, the hard thing is to be paired up with somebody who gets triggered. And part of the thing that we all get caught into, because a lot of people get triggered, and we are paired up with people who get triggered. And then it becomes part of the interpersonal relationship. And so it is a major challenge for a partner to try to be there as a steady presence, to not get triggered in return, which of course happens all the time in domestic violence. You become upset, I become upset, we escalate together. And so it's very important that as a partner, you need to really keep your calm. As a therapist, you calm. As a teacher, you stay calm. A kid will blow up, and you will have an impulse to retaliate, and to really stay still and say, this kid is very upset, and I am not. So this issue of the management of your mirror neuron systems becomes very important, because we always get triggered by each other, and if you start looking upset or frightened, I start feeling upset and frightened, and I tend to match your mood state, and the more evolved you get, the more you realize, she is sad and I am not. How can I help her with her sadness, and I don't have to take into your sadness? Or you may become very mad about something, and you can say, you look really mad about this. How can I help you? Maybe I can do something to make you less mad, but at the end, maybe you want to get some help with this. Yeah. So the ownership in relationships becomes a very, very delicate issue, actually. Doctors and patients, teachers and students, partners, we all trigger each other.
It's part of being human. So we've run on, are 4 minutes over, but I will just ask one final question. So how do you change the central nervous system to live in the now, in the present?
Well, by practicing living in the present. And so to discover how you can do that, and that's different for different people. When I got into yoga, we set up our center, had yoga classes, etc., and a lot of people really began to regulate themselves doing yoga. If in different places, you might have done Tai Chi, or choral singing, or do something, but it's really learning to regulate this creature who you are is a road of discovery, and also to become aware of your own reactivity, and to really see, let's try this. And to really, one of the hardest things is to continue to have an open mind to explore new possibilities. And that is very hard for people to really realize, I'm not quite there yet. Let me see if I can go to mindfulness retreats. Let me see if taking drugs helped me. Well, that didn't work, or maybe it worked. It's all an issue, for each one of us, it's an issue of self-exploration. Because at the end, we are the only people responsible for ourselves. And so, becoming aware of yourself and say, oh, I just made an ass out of myself. Too bad, I feel deeply ashamed of myself. Okay, that's awful. How can I help you, to stay calmer so I don't make an ass out of myself? So the self-awareness and the exploration, and what may work for you may not work for me. It's a lifelong exploration.
Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, for everything you've done.
Thank you for having me. Great.
You are changing the face of mental health treatment.
Hope so.
Yeah.
I don't feel particularly effective, but hey, it's great.
We're getting there. And so thank you so much for all that you do.
Good.
And everything that you are. Thank you to the How To Academy, and thank you to all of you for being here. Very, very grateful. Thank you.